Take this across to Mr. Nikhil Jain. Mr. Nikhil Jain, I'm looking at these pictures and I'm sure the viewers are able to see them. These are Paurakarmikas who are wearing a uniform with BBMP written on them. There are officials wearing a tag of the BBMP. These are officials of the BBMP. They're allowing this to happen on the streets. Today, the Deputy Chief Minister came out and he had to really defend the state government. He had to defend the state of Karnataka over the issue of employers having to display name boards. Now, are these BBMP officials really putting the government in another fix? Because this is something that we saw from pro-Kannada activists. But now we are looking at the BBMP indulging in something like this.
Enthusiastic officers doing something that they think their political masters want them to do, while that is not the case. Nowhere has the Karnataka Congress or the Chief Minister or the Deputy Chief Minister or the government per se has given an order saying that you go ahead and start removing these signboards. Of course, there is a deadline of 28th February that all businesses need to follow and they need to abide by the law.
Then
but until that deadline,
why does the government have no control?
It is wrong, but
should we say that the government has no control over what their officers do, what the BBMP does?
Deepak, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Absolutely not the point I'm making. What I'm trying to say is that certain officials, certain officers, over-enthusiastic officers, perhaps think that this is what their political masters want, but that is not what the Congress wants. The Congress never advocates for such lawlessness and such vandalism and hooliganism, whether it is somebody masquerading as an activist or a civic worker or a officer. It is wrong, and I'm sure that requisite disciplinary action would be taken against these officers who have ordered the removal of these signboards without there being any state government notification or rule to that effect. Of course, businesses would have to follow the signboard rule, but that is after the deadline on the 28th of February. Till then, the removal is wrong, and this is not something that the Congress is backing.
This is not something the government is backing. Yes, 100% there is a law that is in place. It has to be followed by these establishments. I'm not in disagreement to that.
Absolutely.
The question here is, if they do not follow the law of the land, can the BBMP be seen doing this? And it's been 3 days since this video has surfaced on social media, where the government has been very quick to pick up statements on social media. FIRs have been registered in a matter of few hours. 3 days. You see the BBMP officials who are there, who are pulling down name boards. Why hasn't there been any action against them? Is this the way that law is going to be enforced? Let them make it very clear that this is the way that we are going to enforce law now. Because as far as my knowledge is concerned, I spoke to some of the officials in the BBMP, including the top officials. They have said the punitive action that can be taken in this particular case is suspension of licenses, cancellation of licenses. There could be, of course, penalties that could come into picture. Now, these I can understand. There are even situations where they put, they've blackened or they put a plaster or covered the Kannada or the English portion of the name board and asked them to probably comply before the 28th. But this is brazenness. BBMP officials going and pulling it down themselves. I'm going to take this across to Mr. Dhananjay. Mr. Dhananjay, how do you really view this?
This is not what the Congress party is advocating for.
But Congress is the one that is, heading the BBMP at this point in time. How can they, really wash off responsibility here? They'll have to answer. 3 days, nobody has been pulled up for it.
Of course, Mr.
Dhananjay, go ahead.
Of course, they are answerable and
I'll come back to you, Mr. Jain. I'll come back to you. I'll come back to you. You'll have another opportunity to answer. I'll get a response from the others as well.
The BBMP has not witnessed an election for several years now. So the BBMP is run through an administrator, which is controlled by the state government. That is, of course, run by the Congress party. So the Congress party is the one that's responsible for all this hoodlum that we see here. And so I don't think the government can simply wash off its hands. And number one. Number two, 60% Kannada on signboards is welcome. But the time limit or the time deadline, I think, is somewhat unrealistic. And I'm told that the software that's generally used by professionals to set up signages or logos, that is Adobe Illustrator, does not even work properly with the available Kannada fonts. So this is not really love for Kannada, and then these political parties shouldn't be talking so great about Kannada language, because I don't think they've in fact funded enough to make sure that there are these good design fonts that will work well with these recognized design softwares like Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop. So I think this is, I don't know if this is really meant to get some quick votes before the election, the Lok Sabha election May. And the other aspect of MNCs having to display, that does damage the business environment here. And more importantly, it in fact conveys to the people from outside of Karnataka that the people of Karnataka or the Kannadigas are the ones that are quite weak and that they would want all these kinds of state patronage. Let's assume for a moment someone's come from Denmark, an MNC, a manager is from Denmark, they're setting up shop or office in Bangalore, and they come across all these things. In their eyes, the status of Kannadigas will certainly come down. So I don't know if the government or the people representing the government really understand that. Kannadigas are actually already in the forefront in many of these sectors, and what the government does truly brings them down in the eyes of so many of these employers. That could affect in many ways their prospects, their employment, their promotion prospects, and all that.
Yeah.
Because whatever the government does in this manner will have some consequence. Almost always, those consequences will be pernicious. So I think what's happening in Karnataka is truly bad.
Okay.
And what's even worse is that there's nobody who will come forward and say that, look, this is enough. We will take responsibility. I mean, how difficult is it for the government to identify these BBMP employees and then to discipline them? Not necessarily suspend or remove them from service, because I'm very sure that some idiot must have told them to go and do
And
what
this
they